Welcome back into the locker room for our season finale. I am, for the final time, Will Kronsberg, joined this week by a very special guest, former host of this show and the sports director for SGTV, Cade Crenshaw. Cade, how have you been? What have you been up to?
I've been good, Will, and it's good to be back. You feel like you're stepping into old shoes once again. You asked me what I've been up to. I really just working behind the scenes, like you mentioned, transitioning into sports director here at the station. It's been a fun role. It's been an extremely role that I've been able to learn a lot from and work with a lot of really, really good people. So working a lot behind the scenes, not really as much on camera, which sometimes I'm okay with that too, but definitely staying busy as always. And obviously, I say you've done a pretty good job here on LR.
I appreciate it. Now, we're even working behind the scenes, not as much in front of the camera. You still are very aware of what's going on in the sports scene around the Southeast and around the country. There's no story bigger than college football right now. We discussed Rivalry Week on the show last week with Brady Malloy, now getting into what the playoff picture looks like, moving into the offseason and some coaching changes. What are you seeing in the college football scene right now?
What are we not seeing in the college football season right now? Like, everything that could be possibly happening is happening. The sports headlines are not short right now coming up on bowl season. You have obviously college football playoff drama and coaching carousels all over the place. Of course, the big news this week was Lincoln Riley going from Oklahoma to Southern Cal and all the implications that can come from that, and who the next coach of the Sooners is going to be, who knows. But there's so much going on in college football right now outside of the games being played that we're losing some things in translation. We're missing about Oklahoma State having quite possibly one of the best resumes in the country aside from Georgia. We're missing out on the fact that Cincinnati has a really, really good shot of making the playoff as the first ever Group of 5 team to do it. We're missing out on the fact that Alabama isn't the Alabama of old, and their offense may be one of the worst they've had in terms of productivity in recent years. There's a lot of things being lost in translation in college football right now because of the extracurriculars that are going on, and that starts with the coaching carousel here in the offseason.
So getting really specific into what we'll see this weekend, we have the top 5, or what we expect to be the top 5 when those next batch of college football playoff rankings come out. They're all in action in conference championships this weekend. The current number 1, Georgia, as well as Alabama, who's sitting at number 3 currently, they're scheduled to play each other. Cincinnati at 4, the first Group of 5 team in there. They'll be in the American Championship against Houston, who's also ranked. You see Oklahoma State is in action, Michigan. What are your expectations for conference championships?
Simply put, for all of these teams, win and you're in. That's the simple formula. It sounds a whole lot simpler than it actually is with, of course, Alabama and Georgia going head-to-head, but other schools like Cincinnati win, my opinion, they're in. Oklahoma State, you take down Baylor, another top 15 win for you, which would make, 4 or 5 on the season, win, and you're in for the Pokes. You look at another team like Michigan, who just took down Ohio State in dominating fashion, mind that, with an outstanding defense. Jim Harbaugh may be playing one of the best defenses he's ever had, whether it be at Michigan or Stanford or wherever, even the 49ers. I think this Michigan defense may be one of the best in the country. Of course, it starts with Aiden Hutchinson on the defensive line, but how this all shakes out all comes down to the SEC championship game. You've got Georgia. You've got Alabama going head-to-head. Who do I take in the game? I think Georgia's going to win it. I do. I think they're that special of a team. I think this is Georgia's year to win the national championship. I really think Kirby Smart's built up that program enough through recruiting. They positioned themselves well enough to take down the mighty Crimson Tide finally in the SEC. Like, somebody is there to compete with Nick Saban at a realistic level. Like, we always say, well, Alabama could lose any given week. That's not always the case. Alabama is the gold standard in college football. There's no doubt about it. They've been that way for the last decade. Georgia is that emerging second coming. It's a really special group there. So how it all shakes out, it comes down to what happens into Atlanta. If Georgia wins, then you're clear. I think your top 4, obviously pending the others win, but your top 4 would be Georgia, Michigan, Cincinnati, and Oklahoma State, no particular order, if each of those win their respective conference championships. If Alabama wins, buckle up, because then things get exciting. They get interesting, because then it falls on the committee shoulders, and I'm glad I'm not on that committee, is do you value Cincinnati as a Group of 5 team? How well do they stack up? Is Oklahoma State's resume great enough with the amount of top 25 wins that they'll have to overcome that despite having a terrible loss to a 7-5 Iowa State team, whereas Cincinnati beat a top 10 Notre Dame team who could be knocking on the playoffs door too? Obviously, they won't be in a conference championship, though.
Now, Cincinnati, one of 2 undefeated teams currently left in the FBS, Georgia and Cincinnati, who ironically played each other to end last season. But let's say Georgia wins soundly, Alabama sort of out of the picture, and then one of those other 3 teams take your pick, Michigan, Oklahoma State, Cincinnati. They lose. Does it fall to number 6, who's not in action right now, and a team that Cincinnati already beat, Notre Dame, Cincinnati's only top 10 win over the past 2 years? Does Notre Dame find themselves magically elevated into that top 4, or do you still take whoever looks best of those other 3?
Playing off the word you said, magically there, like the shoe has to fit on every single foot possible for Notre Dame to find themselves in the college football playoff this year. The door is just not open for them to waltz right in like it has been in years past. They're not in a aligned conference. They're an independent team, so they're not playing a conference championship. We talk about all these other teams win and you're in this weekend. Notre Dame doesn't have that luxury because they don't have a game to play. So they're going to have to sit at home and hope the resume they have is good enough, but also hope that other pieces may fall into certain places for them, i.e., number 1, Cincinnati loses. If Cincinnati loses, that ironically helps Notre Dame, despite that being their only loss, because then that takes one team automatically out of the picture. Whereas, regardless of Georgia, Alabama, I don't think it affects Notre Dame, regardless of that outcome. Michigan falls to Iowa, okay, you're a little bit closer. Oklahoma State falls to Baylor, things are looking brighter now for Notre Dame. But again, all of these things has to happen for them. It's that chain reaction. If this happens, then this happens, then this happens, then you get the result you want if you're Notre Dame. I don't think they get it.
So let me throw you one more scenario, and it involves Alabama and Georgia, as all of these have. Alabama loses to Georgia in this scenario. Alabama loses to Georgia, but by, let's say, 3, maybe 7 points. But it's a one-score game. No two-loss team has ever made it, but Alabama has made almost all renditions of the college football playoff. If Alabama gets in with 2 losses, is that Alabama bias, or is that exactly what you would expect out of a number 3 team losing by 1 score to the number 1 team?
2-loss teams, non-conference champions, don't make the college football playoff. I just don't think it happens. If you're going to stick with 4 teams, you cannot put a 2-loss non-conference champion over potentially an undefeated Cincinnati, potentially a 1-loss Oklahoma State, potentially a 1-loss Notre Dame even, I think. Because I think if you were to stack up those 2 resumes hand in hand, Notre Dame and Alabama, well, neither of them have a conference championship, so they're on even playing fields there. And let's just take Alabama's loss aside to Georgia. Let's give them the benefit of the doubt because they actually played a conference championship game. Well, they lost to Texas A&M, and you had Notre Dame who lost to Cincinnati, who's a top 4 team. There's no great losses, but which is the better loss? That's the equation I think you look at and the conversation you get into. I don't think Alabama, if they lose in Atlanta, they find themselves in the playoff. They're in the Peach Bowl somewhere, or another SEC-affiliated bowl game. I just don't think they're there this year, and I don't think this Alabama team is good enough to beat Georgia and overpower that defense. When we saw that this past weekend against Auburn, with them, struggling up until 56 seconds left, and finally they broke through Derek Mason's defense. Like, those are the type of things that you have to look at if you're evaluating Alabama. Are they a great team? Do they have great tradition? Absolutely. Is Nick Saban one of the greatest coaches of all time? Sure. Is Bryce Young one of the top young quarterbacks in the game? No doubt. But are they an elite offense this year? I just don't see that in the Crimson Tide.
Now, we know the committee takes the eye test into account, and even if you do come close against a team like Georgia, it's hard to ignore what we saw this past weekend. They were losing to Auburn for almost all of that game, and then it goes into quadruple overtime, and Nick Saban has a couple good 2-point plays to throw out there. They end up winning that one, but that's an Auburn team that's 6-6, first year under a new head coach, and they had a pretty bad loss, actually 2 bad losses immediately preceding this Alabama game. Not a strong showing for Auburn and not a good look for Alabama to almost lose those. But moving from on the field to off the field, we've already discussed a little bit of the coaching changes we're seeing going on, specifically with University of Southern California, the other USC. The merits of Lincoln Riley going from Oklahoma to USC, going from a place where he knew he could win championships. He's been to some college football playoffs, to a team that he's going to have to rebuild a little bit, but in the Pac-12.
This is quite possibly one of the biggest powerhouse names going from a major school to another major football program, in my mind, since Nick Saban took the Alabama job leading LSU. Like, you just don't see coaches make big moves like this, especially the program like Lincoln Riley had at Oklahoma. But hear me out, Will. Southern Cal is a better job for him right now. And here's why. Because obviously Oklahoma about to join the SEC. Obviously, coaches, well, the key to success is winning. That's what matters most. You win, you keep your job. You lose, well, unfortunately, you have to pack your bags and back up the Brinks truck. So if you're Lincoln Riley and you have to go chase after a college football playoff championship, and you join the SEC, you have to go through Alabama, you have to go through Georgia, maybe a resurging Florida eventually. Who knows what other team may spark up in the SEC, all just to get out of your own conference. Whereas you can go to Southern Cal and you're competing against Oregon, maybe. That's it. That's it. Like, as a head coach, you want to be at the top job in your conference. That gives you the best shot at competing on a national scale. Right now, Lincoln Riley, soon to go to the SEC, was going to be the top dog in the SEC. He just wasn't. So go take the Southern Cal job. And like we know, Southern Cal has not been the Trojans as of late. But look at the history that they have. Look at the national championships. Look at the Heisman trophies. Look at the Pac-12 championships. The list goes on and on and on for Southern Cal. Look at the NFL draft picks for the Trojans. This is one of the premier jobs in college football. And keep in mind, the key to coaching is recruiting. He doesn't even have to get on a plane to get some of the best players in the country there in Southern California. You're right there in downtown LA. Everybody loves Hollywood. You're going to get the best players in the country there. You have the stature coming from Oklahoma, proven success in winning. This was a brilliant move, I think, by Lincoln Riley, and a lot of people think it's a rebuild job and all those things. I don't see it. Truthfully, I really believe this, that Lincoln Riley wins 2 conference championships in his first 4 years at Southern Cal. And I don't think a national championship within 10 years is out of the picture for the Trojans. Home run hire for Mike Brown.
So Lincoln Riley is one of 2 major hires, or at least hires at major schools this weekend. He's taken all the headlines, but there's a program with some tradition, and actually one that you mentioned could be a barrier to Oklahoma and the SEC, and that's, of course, the University of Florida. They let Dan Mullen go earlier this month. Now they've hired Billy Napier from Louisiana. He was a guy that's been a candidate for a couple big jobs over the past few years, mentioned as a candidate for this job a year ago. Is that a good hire for Florida, and what can Napier do there?
Great hire. Great hire, Billy Napier. 11-1 Raging Cajun squad this year. One thing about Billy Napier, you can say he was selective in the job process. We talk about Luke Fickell as well in that same conversation. These were mid-major top head coaches that were thrown around in every single, here's the candidates to watch list for these particular jobs. But they were very selective in the jobs they really dug into. Florida's another one of those great programs that expects to win. Dan Mullen had the greatest win percentage in Florida history by anybody not named Meyer or Spurrier. Like, Dan Mullen did not do a terrible job at Florida. It's just, what have you done for me lately? So for Billy Napier, he's got to win quick and he's got to win now, because obviously the athletic director, Strickland down there in Gainesville, not too long of a leash for Gator head coaches. So if you're Billy Napier, again, another one of those recruiting hubs, doesn't have to travel very far. And that's how Florida State won so much under Bobby Bowden. They recruited Tallahassee. They recruited South Florida. Miami under Jimmy Johnson, they recruited the Panhandle, and that was just about it. Like, Jimmy Johnson really ever went on a plane when he was head coach of the Hurricanes before, of course, taking the Dallas Cowboy job. So if you're Billy Napier at Florida, go take over the recruiting state there, because not too many schools are rising up in the state of Florida right now. The Seminoles, while they're getting a little bit better, they're still down. Miami, well, who knows how much longer Manny Diaz has in Coral Gables. Now's the time for Billy Napier to step up. He recognized that. He's a great recruiter and parlaying talent into production on the field. Florida's got playmakers. They can do this. It's all about execution. Billy Napier's the man for the job.
And we'll see Billy Napier every year right here at the University of South Carolina playing Florida every year. Interested to see what Lincoln Riley can do with the other USC job openings like LSU. Oklahoma now open. Interested to see who fills those. And, of course, what we'll see on the field with conference championships moving into the college football playoff before we see you next. But for right now, for Cade Crenshaw, every guest I've had on this year, I'm Will Kronsberg. Thank you so much for joining.